Imagine a quiet valley in Ice Age Europe. A fire crackles inside a rough rock shelter, flickering shadows across the faces of a small band of Neanderthals. Their tools lie scattered. A freshly hunted deer rests nearby. They laugh, they share food, they make plans for tomorrow, unaware that tomorrow will never truly come. Within a handful of generations, their kind will vanish forever, leaving behind only bones, stone tools, and whispers in our DNA. But what really happened during that last night? And why did the Neanderthals disappear while we survived? Picture a circle of figures huddled near a cave mouth at dusk, the flames of a small fire pushing back the biting chill of an Ice Age evening. These are Neanderthals, not the brutish cavemen of outdated stereotypes, but a tightly knit community with intelligence, resilience, and remarkable adaptability. Their lives might surprise you. Archaeology shows us they weren't wandering loners but lived in small groups, extended families or bands of 10 to 20 individuals. Within these groups, knowledge was shared, skills were passed down, and survival was a collective effort. From a stone scraper crafted by a seasoned toolmaker to the careful teaching of a child learning to knap flint, everyday life was centered around cooperation. Their shelters varied. Some huddled near cave entrances, others built wooden structures or tents reinforced with animal hides and bones. Inside, there's evidence of hearths deliberately arranged for warmth and cooking. These weren't random fires. They marked the heart of their community, a place where stories could have been told, tools repaired, and bonds deepened. Neanderthals were skilled hunters, tracking prey like mammoths, bison, and reindeer with wooden spears tipped with sharpened stone. But their diets weren't purely carnivorous. Plant remains found in dental plaque tell us they also gathered nuts, roots, and berries. In some regions, they even used medicinal plants, suggesting an awareness that went far beyond brute survival. What really humanizes them, though, are the traces of care. Some skeletons show signs of healed injuries, broken bones that could only have mended if others had helped feed and protect the wounded. This wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was survival through compassion. Burial sites, too, suggest a sense of ritual, perhaps even the stirrings of symbolic thought. These weren't mindless hunters. They mourned, they remembered, and they likely shared stories around those fires. On the eve of their extinction, Neanderthals weren't on the brink of collapse in a visible sense. They lived, laughed, and endured through extraordinary challenges, unaware that their time as a species was ticking away like the last embers in the hearth. Life for Neanderthals wasn't just about comfort around the hearth. It was about enduring a world that could turn hostile overnight. The Ice Age swung like a pendulum between bitter cold and fleeting warmth. Imagine an environment where one generation saw a lush steppe full of grazing herds, and the next grew up in an unforgiving snowscape, with prey disappearing and plants withering away. The ground itself seemed to pull the rug from under them. Changing climates meant changing survival strategies. Dense forests shrank, mammoth herds migrated farther, reindeer scattered, and rivers shifted their courses. A single harsh winter wasn't a threat to a group built for endurance, but decades of resource decline. That was different. Starvation loomed when hunting returns diminished. Foraging became harder when plant-rich regions froze over. Scarcity was an invisible predator, gnawing at them day by day. And then, as if competing with the climate wasn't enough, another species began arriving in their landscapes, our own ancestors, Homo sapiens. These humans expanded into Europe and Western Asia in waves, bringing with them new ways of thinking, innovating, and perhaps outcompeting. Their technology seemed almost alien: finer blade tools, tailored clothing, and eventually, symbolic art carved or painted on cave walls. To the Neanderthals, these strangers may have been both rivals and mysterious neighbors. But encounters weren't necessarily always hostile. Archaeological traces suggest that Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted for thousands of years in certain regions. They may have exchanged knowledge, shared hunting grounds, or even admired each other's abilities. Yet with two species competing for overlapping niches and resources shrinking because of climate, survival became a delicate equation, and one side had slight but crucial advantages in adaptability. It's humbling to imagine those meetings under gray skies. Did they approach as enemies on a windswept plain, spears raised, or as cautious onlookers, studying faces that looked eerily familiar yet different? Whatever the truth, those encounters marked the beginning of the Neanderthals' final chapter. The balance of survival was tilting, and the shadows around their fires were growing longer. Picture the last generations of Neanderthals, scattered in dwindling pockets across Europe. They didn't vanish in one dramatic battle or some fiery catastrophe. Instead, their end was a slow fade, a quiet unraveling carried out in small moments that must have felt heartbreakingly ordinary. In a cold valley, a group huddles closer to their hearth as food runs scarcer each year. Maybe the hunting grounds they once relied on no longer sustain them. Perhaps they look to the horizon and find fewer and fewer of their kind. Extinction is rarely something you recognize while living it. It's only later in the fossil record that we name it. To them, it may have felt like hardship, like loss, like the default rhythm of life growing harsher. Yet even then, evidence suggests they clung fiercely to connection. In some burial sites, flowers have been discovered alongside bones, an offering perhaps, or a ritual goodbye. Imagine the tenderness required for such an act, arranging blossoms for someone you'll never see again, expressing love in a way words alone couldn't capture. These weren't brutish caricatures but humans in spirit, expressing grief, memory, perhaps even hope. The children, too, leave echoes through the fragments we uncover. Toys carved from bone, small tools fashioned for learning, suggest that they taught and nurtured with patience. In an age of survival, they still found time for teaching and play. That's profoundly human. As the final communities dwindled, they may have looked out at landscapes they once dominated with a sense of belonging, hunts shared, fires tended, songs or rhythms tapped into the dark. We'll never know exactly what they thought, but we can imagine the ache of facing a horizon that promised less with each season. Their last nights weren't filled with knowledge of impending extinction, but with the same resolve to survive tomorrow. Tragically, tomorrow never came, not for them as a species. On that quiet night, embers glowed, stories were shared, and bonds endured until the very end. The Neanderthals didn't die out in silence. They left an indelible trace of humanity that still flickers in us. When the last Neanderthal sparks faded into darkness, it left behind one of history's greatest mysteries. Why did they vanish while we endured? Over the years, scientists have proposed theories that sound like competing chapters in a detective novel, and the truth may involve elements of all of them, woven together. One theory points directly to climate change. The Ice Age was mercilessly unpredictable, shifting from extreme cold to sudden warming. Each shift altered habitats and starved out prey. Neanderthals, adapted to colder weather with stocky builds and specialized hunting methods, may have struggled when landscapes became more variable. Those sudden ecological reshuffles weakened populations already spread thin across vast territories. Another possible culprit was direct competition with Homo sapiens. Our ancestors brought with them something quietly revolutionary: flexibility. While Neanderthals excelled in crafting sturdy tools for very specific purposes, early modern humans created versatile blade technologies and adapted rapidly to new environments. With more diverse diets, stronger long-distance trade networks, and more complex communication, we could outlast challenges that spelled disaster for smaller, less connected groups. Then comes the darker possibility: conflict. Imagine overlapping hunting grounds under diminishing resources, spears clashing not against mammoths but against other bands of humans. Some fossil injuries hint at violence, though the evidence is not conclusive. Whether through battle, competition, or tension that escalated, these encounters could have nudged the balance further against Neanderthal survival. And we can't discount demographics. Their populations were already small and fragmented. Even a modest blow, loss of fertile hunting grounds, disease, or simple bad luck, could have led to a tipping point. Extinctions don't always need a dramatic villain. Sometimes, survival slips away through 1,000 small cuts. Instead of one neat explanation, most researchers now believe it was an overlap of pressures: climate instability, resource scarcity, encounters with us, and the ever-present challenges of small communities surviving on the edge of the Ice Age world. The end was less about a single cause and more about a fragile web collapsing under too much weight. For centuries, the story of Neanderthals ended with a tragic full stop. They were gone and we remained. But modern genetics has upended that narrative in a stunning twist. Neanderthals never fully disappeared. They live on in us. In the early 2000s, as scientists extracted DNA from ancient Neanderthal bones, a startling discovery emerged. Non-African populations today carry between 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA. That means if you have European, Asian, or indigenous American ancestry, you're walking around with echoes of Neanderthal heritage in every cell. Far from an extinct people, they're part of our family tree, woven into the blueprint of humanity. This revelation points to something quietly profound: interbreeding. At some point during those thousands of years of coexistence, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens didn't just clash for resources, they mingled. Encounters on windy plains or in cramped shelters may have led not to battles but to families. This wasn't a one-off event either. Genetic patterns suggest repeated contact and unions across different regions and times. What did we inherit from them? Quite a bit, as it turns out. Certain Neanderthal DNA sequences influence how our immune systems work, helping our ancestors fend off pathogens in new environments. Others may impact hair thickness, skin tone, or even the way we process pain. Strange as it sounds, the allergies you deal with or the way you recover from a cold might trace back to Neanderthal ancestry. But genetics also reveals the limitations of their survival. Neanderthal populations were relatively small and isolated, leading to lower genetic diversity compared to Homo sapiens. Over thousands of years, this genetic bottleneck may have made them more vulnerable to environmental shocks or disease outbreaks. When smaller groups interbred with larger populations of modern humans, their distinct identity eventually blended away, like ink dissolving into water. So while we often speak of their extinction, perhaps it's more accurate to say their story continues in us with every heartbeat, every breath. Neanderthals are not simply lost, they became part of the human journey. The Neanderthals' last fires eventually died out, but their story is far from a tale of simple failure. Instead, it's a mirror held up to us, revealing both the fragility and resilience of life on this planet. Their disappearance reminds us that even the strongest survivors, honed by hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation, can vanish when pressures stack too high. It's sobering to think Neanderthals thrived for over 300,000 years, far longer than modern humans have existed so far. From that perspective, we're still unproven newcomers on Earth's stage. The lesson: survival isn't guaranteed. Climate changes, dwindling resources, competition, even the smallest ecological shifts all still apply to us today. Look around, we're wrestling with many of the same challenges in new forms. The Neanderthals' story might not just be about them, but a warning whispered through deep time. And yet their disappearance isn't just about extinction, it's about connection. They live on in every human whose genome carries their legacy. They live on in our understanding of compassion, evident in their care for the sick. They live on in the caves where they buried their dead, reminding us that the capacity for love, memory, and grief wasn't born with us alone. In them, we glimpse a version of ourselves, different but not alien. Perhaps the most moving truth is this: they aren't simply gone, they became part of us. Every time we trace the arc of our history, every time we study their bones or reconstruct their lives, we keep their memory alive. The last night of the Neanderthals wasn't a closing act, it was a merging with the broader human story. So when we ponder their fate, maybe it's less about why they vanished and more about how entwined our destinies really are. Their shadows stretch forward into our present, reminding us of both our vulnerabilities and our astonishing ability to endure. In that way, the Neanderthals never truly disappeared. They're still here in us, against all odds. The firelight fades, the caves fall silent, and the Neanderthals slip into history. But as we've seen, their story isn't one of disappearance alone. It's a story of endurance, of kinship, of survival against impossible odds for hundreds of thousands of years. And in some strange, poetic way, they're still here. In our blood, in our immune systems, in the echoes of our shared humanity. Their extinction raises a profound question: what does it truly mean to survive? They remind us that survival isn't just about sharper tools or stronger muscles. It's about adaptability, cooperation, and the ability to pass something meaningful forward. If Neanderthals could speak across time, perhaps their message would be both a warning and a hope. Even the strongest can fall, but connection and memory keep us alive in ways that bones never could. And here we are, millennia later, still gathered around the glow of shared stories. Once it was the flicker of firelight in a cave, today it's the glow of a screen, but the purpose is the same: to remember, to connect, and to reflect on what makes us human. So as you step away from this story, take a moment to imagine those last nights of Neanderthals, not as a tale of strangers, but as a chapter of our own history. Their shadows still walk beside us. Their DNA still stirs within us. Their legacy is stitched into the human journey. If this story moved you, sparked your imagination, or made you look at your own reflection differently, then join this community of seekers and storytellers. Tap subscribe to keep exploring ancient mysteries and the fragile, incredible threads that tie the past to today. Share this with someone who loves history and drop your thoughts below. What do you think truly sealed the fate of Neanderthals? After all, the only thing more powerful than remembering the past is carrying its lessons forward. And in remembering them, we make sure the Neanderthals' fire never fully goes out.